Welcome to Credentialing Chronicles, where we spill the doctor tea hotter than your morning coffee.
And give you the insider scoop in the wild world of credentialing, provider drama, and everything they don't teach you in med school.
I'm Shannen, and she's Nyleen, two credentialing pros with front row seats to all the chaos.
From fraud scandals to burnout breakdowns and why your favorite surgeon might actually be banned from 5 hospitals.
We got the gossip and the practical advice to keep you out of trouble and ahead of the game.
So grab your coffee, your compliance checklist, and maybe a lawyer, and let's get into it.
Welcome back to Credentialing Chronicles, the podcast where we uncover the hidden dangers in the medical field and hold the system accountable. I'm Shannen, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Nyleen.
Hey, thank you, Shannen. I'm so excited to chat this week about our favorite topic, doctors. But first, Shannen, before we dive into the tea, can you give our little disclosure?
Yes, definitely. As a disclaimer, the cases we will be sharing with you are all available through public court documents. We promise we are not sharing any privileged or private information, and we have never personally credentialed any of these practitioners. We will not release the names of the practitioners, but we will give you all those juicy details.
Thank you, Shannen. So, hey, everyone, today's episode is another shocking one. We're diving into the case of an oncologist from Montana whose medical license has been renewed and is renewed multiple times, despite mounting allegations of misconduct and patient harm. So, the hospital said that this doctor overprescribed narcotics, gave chemo to patients who didn't even have cancer. That's just some of it. So, the hospital finally took action on his privileges, but the state of Montana is still renewing this guy's license. So, Shannen, tell us a little bit about there.
You know, I couldn't believe it because this is one of the recent cases. So when it came to our attention, I said, oh my God, this is literally what we're talking about happening in real time. This is recent as of this week. This is 2025 that we are talking about. This is happening. So the state of Montana, we're not talking about a couple of minor infractions that are happening. This is some serious allegations, including overprescribing narcotics. With everything going on, he's overprescribing, administering chemotherapy to patients who didn't even have cancer, and a pattern of patient harm that raises the ultimate question. Should this doctor still be prescribing? Should he still have a license? Are the patients safe? Who is going to him, right?
Right. So let's get into the details of the tea. And we're going to go through the story. And this is going to be a really good episode because we're going to talk about what we're going to do about it. And we're going to really, So in 2020, the hospital went ahead and terminated this doctor, apparently, right? Mm-hmm. So he had overprescribed narcotics. And then, like we said, he was giving chemo treatments to patients who apparently didn't even have cancer. Not only is this illegal and fraudulent, but it's just bad medicine, right? You just don't do it. So here's the highlights of where patient harm existed and then questionable medical practices. First of all, he extended misdiagnoses and harmful treatments. There were patients who had not 1 year, not 2 years, you're talking about decades of chemotherapy for cancers that apparently he never had, and he suffered, and then he ultimately died because of this, okay? So was this done intentionally? So, does he want to kill the person?
The doctor's charging Medicaid or Medicare or the insurance all along.
So we're getting into fraud, right? So you have financial incentives and overutilization. So you have Medicare and Medicaid fraud.
Just wanted him to die. You hear that all the time.
Maybe he was just sick. I don't know. Then obviously there's a thing called, for all of those of you out there, it's called an RVU, right? So it's a revenue. The revenue units generated, the doctors get basically paid off of these RVUs, right? And so the money that they make is linked to the volume of the services that they bill.
that they provide. Okay? You're right. In the hospital systems. You're right.
Right. Especially if they're employed. Like if you're private practice, obviously, you're only going to get paid whatever you work. But especially if you're an employee of a group or whatever, they're going to look at your RVUs to justify your salary.
You have to keep it up. If you're not performing, they're not keeping you.
Yes. And I just also want to disclose that ProPublica did an exclusive great article on this, which is where we got the majority of our information and data besides the board website. So just heads up, we're going to put that information in the show notes.
Yes.
Then the hospital really delayed doing anything about this, right? Because you have to do an internal investigation. So they found out about it long before 2020, but they just waited until 2020 to actually terminate his employment. Other issue is there were regulatory oversights. So Montana has continued to renew his license after 2021 and 2023. So again, what we talked about the last 2 times, 2 separate processes, right? Mm-hmm. Board is not finding out what the hospital is doing against them.
Exactly.
Unless somebody tells them.
Then he's renewing, 3 cycles now. 2021, he's on the odd year, 2023, and then now 2025. Yep. And so they're not even looking at what people are saying and the evidence that's stacking up, the pattern of behavior. I think I'm going to say that every episode now, Nyleen, now that you've mentioned
Absolutely.
That. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the main reasons, right, hospitals don't report and don't want to open the can of worms is because the doctors can sue. So this has gone to court because according to this, the Montana Supreme Court upheld the hospital's decision to fire this doctor. So apparently there's some litigation that the doctors must have sued the hospital because he got fired for doing something illegal.
Well, remember the other episode where you talked about the hospital politics? It sounds like behind the scenes right here is hospital politics are going on. So we don't even know what the whole story is, do we? I don't feel like I do. Do you?
No. I think that what really triggered them, the hospital, to finally act is the suspicious deaths linked to his patients.
Yes.
So when a doctor all of a sudden gets all these patients dying, now, don't get me wrong, oncology, you got a lot of people dying, right? You say you got cancer, it's expected that the patient is gonna, but it's suspicious. You know what's going on. These doctors, there's something weird going on. Yeah. What's even more disturbing is that the Montana Department of Justice has now launched a formal investigation into his actions. So now law enforcement is stepping in. So one of the big questions I really want to dive into is, are we criminally prosecuting doctors for practicing medicine arbitrarily? Meaning, doctors are just practicing. They can get a lot wrong, right? Yep. A C also graduated medical school. So we have to analyze the intention. Was the intention to, on purpose, right, hurt these patients, treat them, give them things that they do not need just to get a financial gain?
Exactly.
So,
well, when you have 10 suspicious deaths that have been linked to your practice, what is the magic number, right? What is the magic number of suspicious deaths needed for the board to say, hey, maybe we should look at Dr. Smith over here and see what he's doing? It's good that we're going to break down this case, right? And we're really going to reflect on the system as a whole. What failures allowed him to keep practicing and mostly continue practicing as of today? You can literally go see him today. Whether patients can truly feel safe in Helena, Montana, because this is where this is going on, in Helena, Montana. And, the patients there need to be on the lookout. Again, Google your doctor. Nyleen said it. Go to the medical board. I'm just going to throw that in before we start talking about this. But if you are in Helena, Montana, please listen to our advice and Google. Okay, right, Nyleen?
Yes, absolutely. So the Montana Board of Medical Examiners, which is what they call their medical board, is supposed to be really the defense for protecting patients. Their job really is to vet, monitor, and hold doctors accountable. But in this case, I don't know. As we have reiterated in the past episodes, is this because nobody's reported him to the actual board? Like we have to wait until he's criminally prosecuted for the board to do something?
But my question is why? The hospitals know they're supposed to report. The fellow doctors that are around know that they're supposed to report. Maybe the patients don't, because patients, unfortunately are ignorant. And I hope that this Credentialing Chronicles brings education to patients all over that hear this, that know, oh my goodness, I have a duty as well in this relationship with the doctor. We've seen cases before where a medical board drags its feet or mishandles disciplinary actions. But what is happening here in Helena, Montana is egregious, is just crazy. And again, the patients need to Google. If you are there in Montana, in the state of Montana, make sure you are Googling, because again, this is something he is practicing actively. And how does a doctor with a trail of patients harm continue to be licensed year after year to go ahead and continue to harm Nyleen?
Yeah, and this isn't even an isolated case. It happens more than you think. We're going to mention a couple cases here just as a quick highlight, and we can get into them more as we make other episodes. But why don't you?
We had to argue to say maybe not put more in there, right? We had to say no more cases. The first one, case in point, a neurologist was convicted of sexually assaulting multiple patients despite complaints piling up for years, you all. He was still practicing in multiple states before finally being convicted. And you had more, right, Nyleen? Talk about the next one.
Yeah, well, then there's, of course, the famous Dr. Death, which you definitely need to highlight.
Doesn't he have a Netflix?
Yes, he has the whole Netflix special. Not that he needs to be more of a self-serving narcissist, but whatever.
Exactly.
So he was, for those of you that for some reason have not been around, he was a neurosurgeon. Exactly. Actually, no, it was Peacock. He was a neurosurgeon in Texas who left a horrifying trail of botched surgeries, paralyzed patients, and killed people. And it took multiple reports and years of investigations before his license was finally revoked.
And my question is, how is Baylor doing? How is the hospital doing after that? Because they were the one credentialing. And I will always say, if you guys need to outsource, please look us up, because we would have caught that so good. Because he had that trail back in Tennessee, that he was hurting people back there. These cases have one thing in common, right? Regulatory systems that fail to act fast. And that's exactly what's happening again with this doctor in Helena, Montana. The question is, how many patients have to suffer in Helena, Montana before action is taken, right? Really, because this is their neighborhood that they're hurting.
So Department of Justice now's gotten involved. So now he's criminally, right? He has a criminal action. So we want to talk about... And do you think
they talked to the medical board and said, hey, we're investigating?
Well, they are. They have to. Okay. They have to. They have to. At this point, they have to talk back to the medical board, because now he is being criminally prosecuted. Now, how long that's going to take, I don't know. But for all the doctors out there, for all the credentialing specialists, I want to go through the process the medical board follows to take action on a physician's license, because it involves multiple steps, which explains why it takes so long to get this process going. So, how does this happen? Doctors, pay attention. First, the board has to get the complaint or the allegation, right? Somebody has to say something. That's the first thing that has to happen. Who can this come from? It can come from patients, like we said before. It can come from another doctor. It can come from the hospital staff. It can come from an insurance company, which derives from maybe a malpractice case, right? Complaints to the malpractice for negligence, unethical behavior. So the board has to find out, right? That's number one. Then they go into a preliminary review. And then after that preliminary review, which is done by a committee or staff to try and this is frivolous. This is just somebody, picking on a doctor or whatever. So it kind of gets vetted, right? Then it's going to go to investigation. Right? They're going to start an investigation. What do you think are some of the things that they have to gather in order to do this investigation? Shannen, what do you think are some of the things that they need to get?
I'd say first, the complaining person, whatever that person has, or the hospital, or the patient. And so, they're probably going to see what evidence they have first, right? And then kind of after that, the medical records, expert opinions, interviewing other people that have been in the room with them, other physicians, other circulators, And I'm sure, to be honest, it can probably take months to gather all that. What do you think?
Of course. And remember, we're dealing with government workers, right?
Yeah.
Everything is going to move at the pace of a cog in a wheel. So that's going to take months. Mm-hmm. All right. So now, if the investigation uncovers sufficient evidence of wrongdoing, then the medical board is going to go ahead and file formal charges or an accusation against the physician. And this sets the stage for formal hearings. The physician is notified of the charges and provided a copy of the findings. It is very important to know this verbiage is not for the criminal prosecution. This has nothing to do with criminal. This is medical side of legal. This is just medical.
Okay.
Right.
Now, do they have a burden to tell the police, hey, we found this doctor's been doing this. We want to let y'all know?
That is a great question. They're getting probably the notification from the legal in this case, right? If he's being criminally prosecuted, that's a great question.
Because how does the public
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, how much?
Right. So I think
under the carpet.
Well, I think that's what happened, and please don't quote me, and so I'm sure you guys will hunt me down if I'm wrong, but I think that's what actually happened in Dr. Dunch's case, is the board is the one who finally notified the police. And it did work in that way. We need to update my information on that. But this is the other way around. So the board has been notified of either a criminal proceeding or a complaint. So in this case, the board would already know what the police have and handle it with the physician's license situation. Mm-hmm. So just like in the regular court system, the physician then has a chance to respond. So they do have a chance to respond to those charges. They can admit it, deny them, or they can provide a defense or an explanation. At this time, what happens is the board can offer a settlement and can impose certain restrictions like a suspension, a probation, or additional training, CMEs, courses, without a full hearing. Very different than a trial. Very different than a trial.
Yeah, it sounds different.
So then we have, let's say we got to go to a formal hearing because the physician doesn't settle or agree to the resolution that the board proposed. Correct. Then they schedule a formal hearing. Now, this hearing involves a hearing officer, an administrative law judge, presentation of the evidence by both the board and the physician. So this is the medical board. This is, again, nothing to do with the criminal proceedings outside. Here, they would also call testimony from experts, witnesses, and the physician. The hearing is similar to a trial, but it's not going to have a jury, depending on the jurisdiction of it. Okay?
And who makes the decision? The judge, the administrative law judge?
Right.
Okay.
The judge. So now they listen to the evidence and both sides make their statements, and now there's a decision on the board, the medical board. Right. So the board deliberates and issues the decision after the hearing. So what are the things that can basically, instead of like jail time, you know how you can get like probation or jail time when you go to like criminal court?
Yeah.
So in medical board court, you can get your license suspended either temporarily or permanently. They could get probation. He could just get like a reprimand or a censure, which is like a restriction. He could have a restriction to his license. His license could be completely revoked, which completely taken away. And then on top of that, he can be imposed fines or sanctions.
So that's what they can do. Those are their decisions.
Correct. So this is just starting now with this guy from Montana. So I'd love to like do a follow-up and see what the board actually decides. Yes, because board actions are public information, just like court records. So we can access them and find out what the board actually decided against the doctor's license once this process has actually taken place. Now, similar to criminal court, what do you think that the doctor can do after the judgment has been done?
Appeal.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
So they generally have the right to appeal the decision to a higher authority.
It's a lot, yeah. And they have to get through all of that, right? And then finally, maybe they'll do a public disclosure, right?
Correct. So after the decision is made, the medical board is going to publicly disclose the outcome, like I just said, depending on the severity of the violation. Now, this is often done through the public website announcement or, other channels to ensure public transparency and safety. So there's different varying levels
the nightly news. They don't want to put it on the nightly news. Yeah.
No. Now, something interesting is if the physician's license is placed on a probation or if there are continuing conditions such as like further education or drug monitoring, the board will monitor compliance and will ask for feedback from the physician.
Okay.
And the physician may be required to submit regular reports or undergo additional evaluations to make sure that they're meeting these standards.
Okay.
And really the point is
this every state that does this?
Right. This is like the general process, right? Okay. So everything's going to be a little nuanced depending on the state and how they handle certain things and what they define as certain things.
Okay.
But this is just like the general practice because we want to make sure doctors are aware, like if something happens to you, this is what can happen. This is what you're going to expect. And credentialing people, this is the process is.
But the nitty gritty could totally be, yeah. I mean, what roles do medical boards such as the Montana Board of Medical Examiners play in ensuring that patient safety? And what are the potential challenges they face in making decisions about license renewals, especially in cases involving serious allegations, right? I mean, criminal versus medical. Medicine is a practice, remember that. But now, more and more, we are seeing that physicians are being criminally charged. And it's sad that it has to get to that. But sometimes if you're practicing, right, and things are going really bad and you keep practicing and, it's just not getting better, somebody has to step in. I mean, what are some of the reasons that a doctor can be criminally prosecuted, Nyleen? What have you heard about?
We want to make sure that we understand doctors are humans and they make mistakes, which we've said, right?
Yes. We're talking more of the bad actors, right? Isn't that what you like to say?
We're talking about, correct. The bad actors are people who are intentionally doing something to fraud the government or fraud their patients.
And we really want to talk about them because it adds light to them so that you see it's not the whole profession. It's these specific incidences. And the ones that are amazing and are beautiful and healing doctors, those are the ones that we want to protect from the bad actors. Right, Nyleen?
Right. And those beautiful, wonderful doctors can, make a mistake. They could read something wrong. So we're not going to automatically judge, right? They are practicing. All right. So let's talk about criminal negligence, right? So medical malpractice is usually handled through civil lawsuits, and in some cases where the doctor's actions are deemed grossly negligent or reckless, then criminal prosecution could occur. And that's where that falls under that category of criminal negligence. So what are some of examples of that? A doctor performs a surgery under the influence of alcohol or drugs leading to patient's harm or death. What's another example, Shannen, that you could think of?
Really, a physician, doing the same thing over and really ignoring standard medical procedures that his colleagues are practicing, leading to patient's severe injury or death, right? And where the other colleagues would say, I would never do that.
Right, exactly. And perfect case is Dr. Dunch, right? He was 100% criminal negligence. Number 2. What is another reason we can criminally charge a doctor for practicing medicine? Fraudulent billing.
Big one, right?
You cannot misrepresent information for financial gain. Can't say you did an injection and you didn't even take out a needle. Okay?
So or you did an injection on somebody that didn't need the injection, like this doctor in Montana.
Correct. Yes. So you cannot do that. There's a fraud, waste, and abuse section of Medicare. Like you cannot. You can be permanently banned. And if you are permanently banned, no bueno, right? So we cannot do that. The other thing, which is interesting, is participating in a kickback scheme where the doctor receives money or gifts in exchange for patient referrals or prescribing certain drugs.
Yeah, so I want to just... the anti-kickback law came into effect and remember everybody was on the attestations? Yeah.
Yes. So this is so important because I want the general public to know doctors do not get a kickback because they gave you that new drug, okay? There is a huge outcry out there that people are like, oh, the doctor just prescribed it because he gets paid by the insurance company. Like, no, this is why the law came out, to make sure that that's not happening. So they cannot be getting direct kickbacks for prescribing a particular drug over another.
And the word direct is what is loosely used for the ones that do that.
Correct.
The direct part of it.
What's another reason that they can be criminally prosecuted? Shannen, what's another one?
Substance abuse or addiction, right? I mean, if a doctor misuses or illegally distributes controlled substances, we've seen a lot of that coming out of Florida. They can be criminally prosecuted for drug diversion. I mean, what did they say? They were running the opioids on the I-95. Wasn't it?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were doing.
And, that's prescribing the narcotics or the controlled substances to themselves or others. Even things like Ambien. I've been, in credentialing situations where, the doctor had prescribed himself some Ambien and, fell asleep and things of that nature. Using their medical license to illegally obtain prescription drugs also, and then distributing them for non-medical use, that would be something that's very huge that falls under the drug diversion with the DEA.
And then we have, obviously, if you have sexual misconduct or you assault somebody, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you can't be touching a patient inappropriately, because any of that misconduct is a sexual assault.
Patients or staff, there are other
staff, non-consensual sexual acts during a medical examination. We are at our most vulnerable with our doctors when we're being examined or when we're under anesthesia, and we want to ensure that this is not happening, right? And so they can be criminally prosecuted for doing that. They can be criminally prosecuted for sexual harassment, which everybody can, right? So that's like a no-brainer. They can be criminally prosecuted for impersonating another medical professional. So like a physician associate, which is their new term, can't say they're a doctor. You can't do that. You can't say you're a doctor because you're not a doctor. You can't.
Yeah, no, you definitely can't. And then, the other thing too is, I've seen a lot of cases where a provider has passed away. Now they have this Social Security death database that you go and you check, is this actual provider alive, to try to really combat some of that fraud, because they would just continue practicing as Dr. Smith and with his credentials.
Yeah, these are real things that are happening, guys. The other thing they can be criminally prosecuted for is, in many cases, doctors are required by law to report suspected cases of child abuse, elder abuse, or other forms of neglect.
Yep, they are.
Right? You have to hold
reporters.
Correct. So if a doctor fails to report, which then leads to further harm or injury of a child, which I understand could be hard to prove, but you can be criminally prosecuted for that. So that's just some of the reasons. Can you think of any other ones?
Really, the big one is what this doctor is doing in Helena, Montana, right? The performing unauthorized or unnecessary procedures. And that's classified, what I had learned when I did our research for this, as criminal negligence or battery on a patient. And it really is when a doctor performs procedures without proper consent or necessity. And that's what we're talking about, because the patients think they need the chemo, but they don't need the chemo. And he's giving them the chemo saying it is of necessity, but it's not, particularly if the action leads to harm. And so again, we're talking 10 suspicious deaths have occurred in Helena, Montana from this. And so there lies your suspicion. And they could be charged with criminal offenses such as battery or criminal negligence. And I had to bring that one up to you, Nyleen, because I know that that's literally what's happening right now in Helena, Montana. And I'm glad that the Justice Department is looking into it.
Right. So that leads to a criminally negligent homicide or manslaughter. Like, he could be charged with that, right? And he's making an error, but like, I don't know. We'll see what happens,
my
right?
thing is, the families are going to hear about this, right? And they're going to be so mad that their loved ones have passed away.
And have gone through all of
talking about what's going on.
Yep. And so this is only one of the processes that the doctors deal with and have to go through. And then you have medical staff processes, right? Dictated by policies, rules, regs, bylaws of each facility, should they take action. Because once that board takes action and then that's published to the license, then you're going to have the other effect go. So is everybody else going to be notified? Is the board action going to tell, hey, you have to notify every hospital that you got a board action on your license?
And but my question, and I'm always going to err on the side of the patient, right? So why did it take a media investigation and law enforcement stepping in for this now to be investigated? I feel like the medical board should have acted long before it got to this point with 2, 3 suspicious deaths, right?
Yeah, that's the real question here. The system depends on medical boards to protect the patients.
Yes.
But when they fail,
why is there a board if nobody is boarding, right?
Yeah, the patient's already been harmed and the lives have been lost and the trust is gone. So let's talk a little bit about what can we do, right? So let's just wrap this up and okay, what are some of the things that credentialing processes can do to kind of help weed some of this out, or at least give a nudge to the board and say, can you kind of look at this? It's kind of weird.
And I mean, we're going to say shout out to our medical staff professionals as we do on every episode, but we're really just going to get into a really difficult part right now because, are you allowed to report, right? That's another question. You see this is happening. Are you allowed to say something? How effective are current credentialing and oversight processes in identifying and addressing these systemic issues like overprescribing narcotics, administering inappropriate treatments? I mean, you guys are out there mandated to do OPPEs. FPPEs, and these are out there to catch things like that, to spot trends. Is it a pattern? Are these things happening? Right?
Girl, those are focused reviews and ongoing reviews for all of those.
The patient, I'm sorry. The medical staff people knew what I was talking about. Though.
Yeah. But for our friends out there, those are focused and ongoing reviews. And yes, we subject our doctors to that.
It's just so passionate. Credentialing people are so passionate about the patient safety aspect, right?
Yes, we are. So really take a look at that. And so what improvements can be made to communication and collaboration, right, between our medical boards and our hospitals, and then our law enforcement agencies? These are 3 entities that do have to talk to each other. And like I said, we're not going to go ahead and say, oh, the doctor made a mistake one time, and he prescribed me the wrong medicine and I had an anaphylactic reaction, but you never told the doctor that you were allergic to XYZ.
Yeah, we're not talking about that.
We're not talking about that. We're talking egregious situations, right?
Yeah.
So what you can do as well, we need to talk about establishing clear communication standards between these 3 bodies. And this could involve maybe creating protocols for reporting concerns, ensuring that allegations of misconduct are swiftly communicated, and that there is a shared understanding of how each entity is responding to the situation involving a physician.
True. Yeah, I think you're right. And, really asking what reforms do you think are necessary in medical credentialing systems to prevent providers, practitioners with questionable practices from continuing to operate under a valid medical license, right? I mean, I feel like that's really what you're asking if we had to ask it in a technical term.
Right. So you have to have ongoing monitoring and auditing. You have to offer education and have ethical standards. Doctors got to do CMEs all the time. Every 2 years, they have to meet a certain number of CMEs. There's a CME for abuse and negligence, right? They have to take a CME on this.
Making self-reporting okay, right, Nyleen?
Correct.
Making self-reporting okay should really be where it starts, right?
Right. Advocate for policy and procedure reforms, right? The medical staff could collaborate with other healthcare institutions and regulatory bodies to advocate for the policy reforms and improve medical credentialing practices. And this could include supporting more stringent criteria for license renewal, maybe establishing clear guidelines for responding to allegations, encouraging a review of state and national credentialing standards. I mean, this is what our organizations like NAMS are working towards, and really
NCQA
and NCQA and all the accrediting bodies are working so hard to make sure that we are holding our standards to the highest level, and that these people who are doing this job are true professionals. You have to know what you're talking about when you're working in these departments. And so we see you, we understand, and we want you to advocate with us. So we have a little PSA section, public service announcement for our patients. What do we want to tell our patients, Shannen?
Well, basically, what do we say every single episode, right? Research and verify a doctor's credentials through the state medical boards or online databases, even as simple as doing a Google search and checking the first, second, third page and making sure that you're looking. Seek a second opinion. If they say, hey, you have some cancer, you might need some chemotherapy, go and see another doctor. I know it might sound crazy, but if things seem questionable or aggressive, that's something that you want to investigate, because that's kind of where people are getting into that unnecessary billing and things of that nature. You want to ask questions, right? You want to ensure that a doctor provides clear, understandable answers about diagnoses and treatment options. Show me my x-ray, show me my CT, show me my stuff, show me what a normal something looks like and why mine looks like that. I mean, it's okay to ask that. I mean, we would ask that about buying a new car.
Right.
We would ask that, show me the punch list for my house, right? No, show me the punch list for my body. Show me what I need on my body and what I don't have, and I need to see it. Okay. And report, right? I need to say it again, and again. Report any suspicious or unethical practices to medical boards, hospital administrations, or law enforcement. If you wake up out of your doctor's office, your top is off, your pants are undone, go to a law enforcement professional at that point. Don't go stop home and call Susie. No, go straight there. Something has happened. I don't feel right. I need to make it a report. Right, Nyleen?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So PSA to our doctors. Doctors, we love you, but please maintain transparency and openness with your patients. Ensure they understand their care options and risks. Engage in continuous learning to stay up to date with all the ethical standards and best practices. Be responsive to concerns and questions raised by patients or your colleagues, and be aware. Look at your colleagues, how they're behaving, see what they're doing, just report it, right? We want to report this behavior so that you don't want to ruin your profession because you're friends with so-and-so and he was doing coke last night. You can't do that, right?
Yeah. And now he's operating on the spine today. Yeah. And then credentialers, right? I mean, shout out to medical staff professionals, the OGs, the new Gs, the mid Gs, the people that are going out to get their NAM certifications. You guys are the true MVPs. Verify and continuously monitor the credentials of the healthcare providers. I mean, that's what you all are doing every day. I would say do not depend on web crawlers. Do not depend on the big softwares that are telling you, we could do it all this way. Once in a while, do a manual audit. Make sure that things are actually working as they say that they need to be working. Strengthen communication and collaborate with medical board, law enforcement, and hospitals to address concerns swiftly. So if you see something, say something, just like Nyleen is saying to the doctors. Educate your hospital healthcare staff on ethical practices. A lot of times medical staff will be responsible for the medical executive committee, the credentialing committee, and really, if they have a little onboarding part of their onboarding process, really use that time to talk about what you do as a medical staff and reiterate self-reporting is important. Reporting something that you see that's not right is important. Do not be afraid to speak out. That is important for you to understand. You are saving a life if you're speaking out and you're telling something that has been a pattern of behavior. You're seeing it doesn't mean it's the first time it's happened, honey. It's probably happened 1,000 times before. Yep. And then keep yourself up to date, right? I mean, what do you think, Nyleen?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. So we want to take it out to you guys. Should doctors with a history like this oncologist ever be allowed to practice again? Should the medical board system be overhauled? And how does this happen?
Exactly. It seems like we always leave you with more questions than what we answer, right, Nyleen? But let us know your thoughts. Send us a message on Instagram at Cred Chronicles or email us at credentialingchronicles.com.
And if you want to check out your own doctor's backgrounds, we're going to drop some links in the show notes, teach you guys how to do this.
And make sure you're checking in Helena, Montana. I'm going to put you on blast until you guys actually research and do something with this doctor. But that's it for today's episode of Credentialing Chronicles. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time where we'll expose another shocking reality of the world of medical credentialing. What do we say, Nyleen? Stay credentialed, not
canceled.
Whoo, that was a lot of tea. Who knew doctors had more drama than reality TV?
And if you think that was wild, just wait till next week. We've got more stories, more scandals, and more credentialing chaos coming your way.
Hit that follow button, and don't forget, just because they have an MD doesn't mean they have a clean record.
See you next time on Credentialing Chronicles. Stay credentialed, not canceled.